So, the country to take advantage of the Atlantic Ocean from Europe first was interestingly not one of the more powerful principalities like France, but one of the lesser populated areas of Western Europe, Portugal. Europe began to consolidate politically in the 15th century, the 1400s, into approximations of the nation states we're familiar with today. Uh, Portugal was one of the first to do so, to consolidate its dozens of small fiefdoms under the generalized control of one king. And it did that early in the 15th century. Uh, and the person who did that was called Henry the Navigator, or Prince Henry. So, Henry dreamed of capturing the African market from the Islamic empires and bringing it into European merchant orbit. Portugal was hemmed in by Spain, so it wasn't really able to trade with much of Europe because Spain was in the way, and it wasn't really populous enough to engage in territorial expansion in Europe. It didn't have enough people to engage in an invasion of Spain or France or anywhere else nearby in Europe. So Portugal had to look outwards, and so they looked towards Africa. Prince Henry the Navigator, he put the country's resources to work developing maritime technology. So one way he did that, or the way he was able to do that, was because there was one king. He was in charge and was able to consolidate the country's resources. So even though it was small, it was able to put what resources it did have into improving its navigational technology. What they did was improve upon existing Arabic technology or Islamic technology, such as a maritime compass that floated so it could be used at sea to determine your direction. The astrolabe, which was used to measure the angle of the Earth with the stars to compute your latitudinal position, or the sextant, also used for determining position or latitudinal position, and the hourglass was used to measure speed. Another one of the innovations that Portugal led was the development of a much more seaworthy vessel called the caravel. The caravel was superior to medieval galleys. It was lighter, it was more maneuverable, and it could sail against the wind. It would not break apart in rough seas. Medieval European galleys were slow and vulnerable to strong waves in the open seas. The caravel had angular sails. It had a longer, narrower hull, and which made it more maneuverable. It made it able to steer more effectively and buffer against the waves. So Henry put these technologies to use, and the Portuguese began traveling further and further south. So the Portuguese tried at first to colonize parts of Africa. They didn't really succeed in that. For one, they didn't have enough population to colonize. Portugal only makes up 3% of Europe's total population. So they didn't have enough people to colonize these areas of Africa. They would have had to conquer them. Furthermore, when Europeans went to Africa, if they tried, if they tried to live there for any length of time, they would die from disease. So instead, what the Portuguese figured out is that they didn't need to conquer African territory in order to make money off of it. What they figured out is they could control small islands that would develop sugar, and how they copied this, or what the Portuguese developed, was a more extensive system that was based on the prior Islamic system of sugar plantations. The Portuguese developed that, and they also built a series of forts and trading outposts along the coast of West Africa. They didn't need to conquer this territory, they just needed to hold one trading outpost every few 100 miles along the coast, and would use that as a way station to trade with African peoples themselves, so that those Portuguese people wouldn't actually have to conquer territory. So the Portuguese had these two developments which started making it a lot of money. One were these trade outposts. The Portuguese pushed further and further south in Africa, trading for commodities such as gold, ivory, pepper, and eventually they started trading in human beings, in people. Sugar was a relatively rare commodity in the Middle Ages. Uh, it was developed by production of it was more extensively developed by Arabs in the Middle Ages. The Portuguese copied some of those methods and improved upon them. So sugar requires intense work during planting and lots of care as it grows. During harvest time, when you want to harvest sugar, it has to be processed with continual labor input over 24-hour periods. So it demands cheap available labor. It also exhausts the soil. So Portugal tried to develop sugar in its own territory. That didn't work well. So they started developing it on these volcanic islands here off the coast of Africa, like the Canary Islands. And they found it grew quite well there. The Canaries, the Madeiras, and the Azores, little islands out here that were easily conquered, unlike the mainland of Africa here. Little islands that produced just some sugar produced a ton of profit. So the problem was sugar produced a lot of profit, but it also required lots of labor, and so you needed slaves to work this territory. So the Portuguese started developing this trade for various goods, including people along the coast of Africa. Those people would staff those sugar plantations, and the Portuguese began thinking, I wonder if there's anywhere else we could find land for plantations that's easily conquerable. Also, the Portuguese started thinking, I wonder if we keep pushing further, will we discover better trade outposts or even routes to Asia. Here's some images of sugar plantations. It needs constant care, and it's very difficult work. So the Portuguese continued to explore. In the 15th century, the 1400s, they grew more and more wealthy, and they pushed further and further south to develop greater trade networks. They were convinced that sailing around Africa was the fastest way to get to Asia, and so they developed this route and kind of staked their claim on it. In 1488, an explorer named Bartolome Diaz reached the Cape of Good Hope, the southernmost point in Africa. In 1498, another Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama reached India by rounding the southern tip of Africa and establishing some very lucrative trading posts here on the west coast of India. So the Portuguese started making windfall profits as a result of these trading efforts. So for a very small country, it grew extremely wealthy. Someone who was watching all this was Spain. So Spain hadn't been able to compete with Portugal right away because it, unlike Portugal, Spain was not unified. It was split into various kingdoms, the most powerful of which were Aragon, Castile, and the Moorish territories here, the Islamic areas, the remnants of the Islamic expansions of the early Middle Ages. In 1492, it just so happened that year that the Reconquista, or the reconquest, occurred. Spain finally defeated the Moors in the area of Granada in 1492. So the Moors were pushed back to their stronghold here and eventually defeated because the kingdoms of Aragon and Castile united against them. So Spain consolidated its territory and pushed the Moors, pushed the Muslims out of Spain. So with that kind of feeling of celebration, the Spanish were more interested in trying to compete with Portugal after this. So they were feeling very happy over their victory over the Moors, about their victory over the Moors, and wanted to compete more directly with Portugal's trade regime. Someone who offered an opportunity for a competition was Christopher Columbus. Columbus was the son of an Italian weaver, middle class merchant, and politician, but he rejected his father's line of work and decided to engage in exploration. So he taught himself geography, navigation, and Latin, and by the 1480s he was an experienced mariner, well known in the maritime community, having been on several Portuguese expeditions to Africa. He became convinced that the world was round, as most people did. Most educated people in the 15th century were well aware that the world was round. They did not think the world was flat. That's ridiculous.